Hello, I'm Valerie Reid, and because it is the holiday season and I am a true Christmas lover, I have two Christmas stories for you today. They're both by two different authors. One is Taylor Caldwell, the other is Rod Serling, and they are both true stories in answer to the question, what is your most memorable Christmas? Now, Taylor Caldwell was born in 1900. And when she was 38 years old, she published her first book, and it was the first of 41 books. Some of her books that may be familiar, Dear and Glorious Physician, Captain and the Kings, Answer as a Man, and Tender Victory. It's from a different era, but they may be some of her most famous. Now, the story that I'm going to read takes place in the 1920s. And keep that in mind when you hear the part about her daughter, 5-year-old daughter, going to a convent boarding school and being left alone all day when her mother works. Keep in mind that it is 100 years ago and things were a little different. Her story is entitled My Christmas Miracle, and it is unabashedly Christmassy. For many of us, one Christmas stands out from all the others, the one when the meaning of the day shone clearest. Although I did not guess it, my own truest Christmas began on a rainy spring day in the bleakest year of my life. Recently divorced, I was in my 20s, had no job, and was on my way downtown to go the rounds of the employment offices. I had no umbrella, for my old one had fallen apart and I could not afford another one. I sat down in the streetcar, and there, against the seat, was a beautiful silk umbrella with a silver handle inlaid with gold and flecks of bright enamel. I had never seen anything so lovely. I examined the handle and saw a name engraved among the golden scrolls. The usual procedure would have been to turn in the umbrella to the conductor, but on impulse, I decided to take it with me and find the owner myself. I got off the streetcar in a downpour and thankfully opened the umbrella to protect myself. Then I searched a telephone book for the name on the umbrella and found it. I called and a lady answered. Yes, she said in surprise. That was her umbrella, which her parents, now dead, had given her for a birthday present. But, she added, it had been stolen from her locker at school, she was a teacher, more than a year before. She was so excited that I forgot I was looking for a job and I went directly to her small house. She took the umbrella and her eyes filled with tears. The teacher wanted to give me a reward, but though $20 was all I had in the world, her happiness at retrieving this special possession was such that to have accepted money would have spoiled something. We talked for a while, and I must have given her my address. I don't remember. The next 6 months were wretched. I was able to obtain only temporary employment here and there for a small salary, though this was what they now call the Roaring Twenties. But I put aside 25 or 50 cents when I could afford it for my little girl's Christmas presents. It took me 6 months to save $8. My last job ended the day before Christmas. My $30 rent was soon due, and I had $15 to my name, which Peggy and I would need for food. She was home from her convent boarding school and was excitedly looking forward to her gifts the next day, which I had already purchased. I had bought her a small tree, and we were going to decorate it that night. The stormy air was full of the sound of Christmas merriment as I walked from the streetcar to my small apartment. Bells rang, and children shouted in the bitter dusk of the evening, and windows were lighted, and everyone was running and laughing. But there would be no Christmas for me, I knew. No gifts, no remembrance whatsoever. As I struggled through the snowdrifts, I just about reached the lowest point in my life. Unless a miracle happened, I would be homeless in January, foodless, jobless. I had prayed steadily for weeks, and there had been no answer but this coldness and darkness, this harsh air, this abandonment. God, and men had completely forgotten me. I felt old as death and as lonely. What was to become of us? I looked in my mailbox. There were only bills in it and a sheaf of them, and 2 white envelopes which I was sure contained more bills. I went up 3 dusty flights of stairs and I cried, shivering in my thin coat. But I made myself smile so I could greet my little daughter with a pretense of happiness. She opened the door for me and threw herself into my arms, screaming joyously and demanding that we decorate the tree immediately. Peggy was not yet 6 years old and had been alone all day while I worked. She had set our kitchen table for our evening meal proudly and put pans out and the 3 cans of food which would be our dinner. For some reason, when I looked at those pans and cans, I felt brokenhearted. We would have only hamburgers for our Christmas dinner tomorrow and gelatin. I stood in the cold little kitchen and misery overwhelmed me. For the first time in my life, I doubted the existence of God and His mercy, and the coldness in my heart was colder than ice. The doorbell rang, and Peggy ran fleetingly to answer it, calling that it must be Santa Claus. Then I heard a man talking heartily to her and went to the door. He was a delivery man, and his arms were full of big parcels, and he was laughing at my child's frenzied joy in her dancing. "This is a mistake," I said, but he read the name on the parcels, and they were for me. When he had gone, I could only stare at the boxes. Peggy and I sat on the floor and opened them. A huge doll, 3 times the size of the one I had bought for her, gloves, candy, a beautiful leather purse. Incredible! I looked for the name of the sender. It was the teacher. The address simply California, where she had moved. Our dinner that night was the most delicious I had ever eaten. I could only pray to myself, "Thank you, God." I forgot I had no money for the rent and only $15 in my purse and no job. My child and I ate and laughed together in happiness, and then we decorated the little tree and marveled at it. I put Peggy to bed and set up her gifts around the tree, and a sweet peace flooded me like a benediction. I had some hope again. I could even examine the sheaf of bills without cringing. Then I opened the 2 white envelopes. One contained a check for $30 from a company I had worked for briefly in the summer. It was, said a note, my Christmas bonus, my rent. The other envelope was an offer of a permanent position with the government to begin in 2 days after Christmas. I sat with the letter in my hand and the check on the table before me, and I think that was the most joyful moment of my life up to that time. The church bells began to ring. I hurriedly looked at my child, who was sleeping blissfully, and ran down to the street. Everywhere, people were walking to church to celebrate the birth of the Savior. People smiled at me, and I smiled back. The storm had stopped. The sky was pure and glittering with stars. "The Lord is born," sang the bells to the crystal night and the laughing darkness. Someone began to sing, "Come, all ye faithful." I joined in and sang with the strangers all about me. I am not alone at all, I thought. I was never alone at all. And that, of course, is the message of Christmas. We are never alone. Not when the night is darkest, the wind coldest, the world seemingly most indifferent, for this is still the time God chooses. And now for Rod Serling's story. Rod Serling was born in 1924, and he is perhaps most famous for creating and producing the brilliant TV show The Twilight Zone, which, by the way, won many awards. And many of the episodes were short stories that he himself had written. He was a prolific writer. He was also an anti-war activist, and besides writing short stories, he wrote a teleplay which became a 1962 film starring Jackie Gleason, Mickey Rooney, and Anthony Quinn called Requiem for a Heavyweight. He died when he was 50 years old, but in his short life, he accomplished a great deal. And here is Rod Serling's most memorable Christmas. I'm writing this for a very limited audience. The 1,800 members of the 511th Parachute Infantry who spent a Christmas on a God-forsaken mountaintop in the Philippine Islands, 1944. It was a gray morning carved out of gray clay and shadowed by fog. It was not just a time, it was a mood. The kind of mood that is part of the province of combat and never conveyed vicariously to the human being who has not lived physically with the tension, the violence, the anguish of protracted war. But the 1,800 men I make mention of, they'll remember it, and they'll remember that morning. It came after a month of nameless, dateless days in a month, because war is like that. It is separated into moments of survival, and the passage of time is unheeded except to chronicle the fact that some have lived and some have died. On this particular Christmas morning, the regiment had been committed for 31 days. They had marched up the jungle sides of a mountain to mop up what was supposed to be the defeated remnants of some scattered Japanese units. The remnants turned out to be a division in force and intact. The 511th got baptized in a ceremony that took 1 month of daily battle and desperate and constant hunger until, on the 24th of December, it had finally defeated its brave and desperate enemy. A long line of men rested along the sides of the jungle trail, gray jumpsuits that blended with the gray-covered beards, tired, inward-looking eyes that reflected nothing but the fog and the grayness of the morning. We had come up as fresh initiates in the art of war and were now dirty, postgraduate men taught wisdom by the impatient teacher of conflict. We lay there with a resignation to the wet, to fatigue, and to a neutral awareness that we breathed and could walk, and that 10 miles down the mountain there would be sleep and food. A 19-year-old Second Louis got up to his feet and spoke through the first beard he'd ever worn. "All right, on your feet, let's move out." We rose. The packs, the ammo belts, the weaponry all fused to us like extensions of our bodies, the weight so constant that it was all part of us. And we started to plod slowly through the ankle-deep mud, a long line of dirty, bearded sameness. And then somebody far up the line stopped dead, and there was a whispered message that went down past the ranks. Each man froze and held his breath because any whisper passed down from up front meant a machine gun or a pocket of Japanese or a mined trail or any one of a dozen other reminders that there was a war here and we were a part of it. But this particular message was nothing less than an incredible jar to memory, a reminder of a different sort. The whispered voice of the man in front of me said, "It's Christmas." I continued to lift my feet up one after the other, weighed down by the 50 pounds of equipment attached to a sparse 100-pound frame, and suddenly I wasn't aware of the cold rain. I wasn't conscious of the mud that clung. I gave no thought to the sick little ache deep inside the gut that had been with us for so many days. Someone had just transformed the world. 2 words had just reminded us that this was the earth and this was mankind, and that people still lived, and we did also. It's Christmas. And then a scratchy, discordant, monotone voice way up front started to sing, "Oh, come all ye faithful." Somebody else picked it up, And then we all sang. We sang as we walked through the mud. We sang as we led the wounded by the hand and carried the litters and looked back on the row of handmade crosses left behind. We sang, "O come all ye faithful." It had come indeed, the holy day, the day of days. It was Christmas.